In the elegant streets of Boston, Caroline Barnes' small apartment maintained its quietness. The morning sun streaming through the window illuminated her tired face as she sighed. Caroline had worked at a local family-owned accounting firm for 5 years, but this morning was her last day. "I'm sorry, Caroline. With this recession, we just can't continue," Mr. Green, the owner of the firm, said with his head bowed. The economic downturn caused by the pandemic had finally swallowed the small accounting firm. Upon returning home, Caroline spread the contents of her empty desk drawer on the table. A letter of recommendation, her final pay stub, and a few photographs. She took a sip of coffee and opened her computer to search job sites again. For 3 months, she had been applying daily, but companies all over Boston had frozen hiring. Her savings were dwindling day by day, and paying her apartment rent was becoming difficult. Caroline's parents owned a luxurious mansion in Newton, a Boston suburb. Her father, Walter, was the founder of Barnes Construction, a large construction company. Her mother, Martha, was known as a local philanthropist. Her sister, Becky, was a senior executive in her father's company and was set to take over the business eventually. Caroline had been strictly raised by her parents since childhood. Her father, in particular, had high expectations of her. "Don't bring shame to the Barnes name," he would often say. However, their eyes were always on her sister Becky. Becky had been an excellent student and, upon joining her father's company, displayed remarkable abilities and was quickly promoted. Caroline, on the other hand, chose a different path. After high school, Walter told her, "Come work for the company," but she insisted, "I want to follow my own path." She majored in accounting in college and tried to build her career using only her own strength, without any assistance from her family. "Follow your own path? Don't say such naive things," Walter raged. "Our company offers permanent stability, yet you refuse it." This choice cooled the relationship between Caroline and her family. A rift developed especially with her sister Becky. Becky met her father's expectations and considered Caroline's choice foolish rebellion. The sisters barely exchanged words for several years. "I would definitely choose Dad's company. That independence of yours will come back to haunt you someday," Becky said to Caroline in their last conversation. Alone in her apartment, Caroline gazed out the window and posted briefly on social media, "Lost my job today. Looking for a new path." She didn't contact her family directly. However, her post quickly caught Becky's eye. "Did you see? Looks like Caroline got fired," Becky said as she entered her father's office. Walter looked up from his papers and smiled thinly. "Reality isn't so sweet after all." Martha called saying, "I'm worried about you," while inviting Caroline to Thanksgiving dinner. On the surface, it was to show family support, but Caroline sensed something off in her mother's tone. It didn't sound like sympathy, but rather a kind of satisfaction. Caroline stared at her apartment rent bill and sighed deeply. She had lost her job, had no prospect of a next paycheck, and was in a difficult situation. She was reluctant to accept the family invitation, but she had no choice but to be honest about her situation and ask for temporary help. Swallowing her pride, she replied, "Thank you, Mom. I'll come." Thanksgiving night quietly enveloped the streets of Boston. Caroline took a deep breath in front of the upscale restaurant Le Chateau. She had chosen an elegant black dress to appear confident, though in reality, her heart was filled with anxiety. As she fixed her hair, she whispered to her reflection in the mirror, "It's okay, Caroline. Just a family dinner. Put aside your pride and ask for their help." When the restaurant door opened, warm air and the refined aroma of cooking greeted her. Elegant chandeliers illuminated the hall, and classical music played softly. Le Chateau, renowned as an upscale restaurant in Boston, was a choice typical of her family for a gathering place. "Ah, the Barnes reservation," the hostess smiled. "Everyone is already waiting." Caroline followed the hostess to a luxurious private room in the back. Each step felt heavy. When the door opened, her family was seated around an opulent table. "Caroline, it's been a while." "Lovely dress," Martha greeted with superficial kindness, but her eyes were cold. Her mother stared at her while holding a champagne glass. "Thank you, Mom," Caroline replied with a tense smile. "You're late." "As usual," Walter said, glancing at his watch. He was wearing a perfectly fitted expensive suit as always, sitting at the head of the table with an air of authority. "Sorry, the train was delayed." Before Caroline could finish her excuse, Becky interrupted. "Excuses again? Was it the same at work? Is that why you got fired?" Becky smirked maliciously. She was wearing a designer dress with a pearl necklace gleaming around her neck. Caroline was momentarily at a loss for words but managed to maintain her composure as she took her seat. Appetizers were already on the table, and wine had been poured. "Let's make a toast," Martha raised her glass. "To family reunion." Everyone raised their glasses, but to Caroline, they all seemed strangely elated. She softly said cheers, and took just a sip of wine. "So, Caroline," Walter began. "How have you been lately?" Caroline thought she was prepared, but she still felt a lump in her throat. "Actually, it's been tough. I'm looking for a new job." "Oh, that's hard," Martha's voice feigned sympathy, but her eyes were laughing. "But I'm sure you'll find a job suited to your abilities." Becky giggled. "The small accounting firm went under, right? You should have joined Dad's company from the start." As the meal progressed, the conversation flowed seemingly calmly on the surface, but gradually turned toward Caroline's unemployment. Course after course of chefs' recommendations were brought to the table, but Caroline's throat felt increasingly constricted. By the time the main dish arrived, Martha suddenly stood up and raised her glass. "Now, this is a special celebration," she held up her champagne glass with a broad smile. "Celebration? For what?" Caroline asked in confusion. She looked at each family member's face. They were all smiling as if sharing a private joke. Walter laughed slowly while pouring wine. "Got fired? Career isn't for you. I knew you'd realize that someday." "But, why are you celebrating me getting fired?" Caroline asked with a hurt expression. Her voice trembled. "It's a good opportunity to face reality," Becky giggled and took a sip of champagne. "Don't worry. Maybe they'll hire you as a waitress." Caroline froze at these words. Her family was celebrating her failure. Perhaps they had been waiting for the moment of her downfall ever since she decided to go her own way years ago. "I told you," Walter said sternly. "Barnes family members contribute to the family business. Your independence was just childish rebellion." Martha smiled coldly. "You chose your own path, Caroline. And see? What happened in the end?" Becky smiled triumphantly. "Didn't I tell you? That you'd be hurt someday. How does it feel now?" Caroline was crushed by her family's words and could no longer swallow her food. Her steak was barely touched. Her family laughed and chatted around her, seemingly enjoying her difficulties. "You should admit it now," Martha said. "That your choice was wrong." "That's right," Becky agreed. "If you had worked for Dad like me, this wouldn't have happened." Caroline couldn't bear it anymore. She put down her fork and slowly stood up. Her hands were shaking, but she held her head high. "I didn't come here to be treated like this." Caroline's voice trembled with emotion. Being dramatic again, her mother rolled her eyes. "Why don't you just accept reality? You failed." "That's right. You should have come to Dad's company." "But you said you wanted to follow your own path," Becky said sarcastically. She smiled while drinking her wine, as if enjoying Caroline's pain. "Did you think you could come home if you failed?" Walter said coldly. His eyes showed contempt. "You chose your own path." Tears welled in Caroline's eyes, but she struggled not to show them. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. She never thought her family would be this cruel. She had come seeking help, but they were celebrating and mocking her failure. At that moment, Robert Griffin, the restaurant manager who was nearby, had been listening to the conversation. 45-year-old Robert was the owner of an upscale restaurant chain and had just acquired this restaurant. He happened to notice the conversation at this table as he was passing by. When Caroline grabbed her handbag and was about to leave, Robert approached her. "Excuse me, Ms. Barnes," Robert addressed her politely. He was dressed in a sophisticated black suit and had a warm smile. "May I have a word with you?" Caroline nodded in confusion, partly wanting to get away from her family's table. Robert guided her to a bar counter a little distance away. "I'm interested in your background. I happened to overhear that you worked at an accounting firm," Robert said in a quiet voice. "Yes, but now." As Caroline started to speak, Robert raised his hand. "Actually, my restaurant group is in the middle of expansion, and I wanted to strengthen the management team. Would you come to my office tomorrow?" Caroline stared at him with an incredulous expression. "Really?" "Of course," Robert answered with a serious expression. "Your skill set is very valuable to us. I've been looking for someone with financial management experience." Caroline looked at her family's table. They were still drinking wine, celebrating her misfortune. She took a deep breath and turned back to Robert. "I'd like to consider it," she replied with a voice that had regained confidence. "I'll come tomorrow." Robert handed her his business card. "I'll be waiting at 10 a.m. in the office on the second floor here." Caroline accepted the card and showed her gratitude. Then she returned to her family's table and stood with a dignified attitude. "Thank you for the celebration," she said calmly. "But this might be our last supper." Her family showed expressions of confusion at her changed attitude. "What do you mean?" Becky asked. Caroline just smiled without answering. She slung her handbag over her shoulder and walked away gracefully. Her family was left behind with puzzled expressions. As she left the restaurant, Caroline felt like she could breathe freely for the first time in hours. There was anger and sadness in her heart, but at the same time, a strange sense of hope was budding. The next morning, Caroline stood in front of a loose chateau. As if to confirm that last night's events weren't a dream, she stared at Robert's business card again. Robert Griffin, founder and CEO of Elite Dining. She took a deep breath and entered the restaurant. The restaurant was quiet, with a different atmosphere from the night. Staff were busily preparing for the morning. Following directions, Caroline went upstairs to visit Robert's office. The office was small but refined. The view from the window showed Boston's cityscape, and numerous restaurant award plaques adorned the walls. "Good morning, Caroline." Robert stood up when he saw her and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," Caroline returned the handshake, though nervous. Robert offered her coffee and invited her to sit. "Let me explain a bit about my business," he began in a gentle voice. "Elite Dining is not a large group. I only manage this Le Chateau and another restaurant in the suburbs called Olive Terrace. It's small scale, but because we're dedicated to quality and customer experience, we've earned a good reputation." Caroline nodded as she listened. "I'm interested in your accounting skills," Robert continued, offering her a warm cup of coffee. "Actually, my business partner suddenly decided to retire last month, and I've been looking for someone to oversee the financial aspects. It's a small business, but there's potential for growth. Would you like to start as a financial manager?" Caroline's eyes widened. "Really? But I don't have experience in the restaurant industry." "Sometimes, a fresh perspective is needed," Robert smiled. His eyes seemed sincere and trustworthy. "Your accounting experience is valuable to us. And seeing your situation last night, I also sensed your strength. We need someone who can remain calm in difficult situations." Caroline considered the offer. She needed a job, and she was interested in a new challenge. Above all, she had a strong desire to prove her worth in an environment away from her family. "Thank you, Mr. Griffin. I'll accept," she answered with determination. "Wonderful. Please call me Robert," he said joyfully. "Can you start tomorrow?" Regarding salary and conditions, they discussed the details, and Caroline signed a contract. Her salary was slightly lower than her previous job, but she felt reassured by the growth potential and the ability to start work immediately. From the next day, Caroline began working at Elite Dining. She immediately started analyzing the company's financial situation. Examining the books, she noticed that while the restaurants were profitable, there were some inefficiencies. After a few days, she compiled improvement suggestions and proposed them to Robert. "This is excellent analysis," Robert marveled as he looked at her report. "Especially the inventory management proposal. I'd like to implement it right away." Caroline's proposals were adopted one after another, and within just 2 months, the company's profits visibly improved. "Caroline, your strategies are remarkable," Robert praised her in a management meeting. "Profits have increased by 15% in just 2 months. Hiring you was one of my best decisions." Colleagues also recognized her work, and the restaurant atmosphere became more vibrant. Caroline regained her confidence. However, one day, her phone rang. Becky's name displayed on the screen. Caroline hesitated for a moment but answered. "Caroline?" Becky's voice was trembling. "I need to talk to you." "What is it?" Caroline asked calmly. "Caroline, it's terrible," Becky's voice was filled with anxiety. "Mom is seriously ill, she needs heart surgery. And there are problems with the company." Caroline listened silently. Thoughts raced through her mind. Was this a trap? Or was it truly an emergency? "Please, help me," Becky pleaded tearfully. "I have no one else to turn to." Caroline took a deep breath. "Tell me the details." According to Becky's explanation, Martha had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition requiring expensive surgery. And Barnes Construction was facing severe financial problems. Caroline was suspicious and decided to investigate herself. With Robert's permission, she took a few days off and began her investigation. Visiting the hospital, she confirmed that Martha was indeed hospitalized. She also gathered information about her father's company through contacts. The investigation revealed that Becky had diverted company funds for personal investments and suffered huge losses. The company was on the verge of collapse, and Walter seemed unable to fully grasp the situation. Caroline returned to Robert's office and explained the situation. "That's a difficult situation," Robert said with a serious expression. "What do you want to do?" Caroline gazed out the window, thinking. "They hurt me. But they're my family." "Family is family," Robert said quietly. "Whether to forgive their mistakes is up to you, but whether to help them is a separate issue. My advice would be not to be trapped by past emotions and think about what you can do now." Caroline expressed her gratitude and made her decision. She decided to support her mother's medical expenses. Between her savings and an advance from Robert, she could manage. However, regarding the company's problems, she set conditions. She called Becky. "I'll help with Mom's situation. But you should talk honestly to Dad about the company and take responsibility. That's my condition." On the other end of the phone, Becky was silent before answering in a small voice. "All right, thank you, Caroline." Caroline hung up and sighed deeply. Her new life was taking an unexpected direction. However, now she had confidence to continue her own path. Her new career with Robert and Elite Dining was giving her strength. Looking out at the Boston streets through the window, she felt hope for the future. Becky initially resisted Caroline's conditions. They were facing each other at a cafe outside the hospital. A light rain continued falling outside the window, and steam rose from the coffee placed on the table. "There's no evidence," Becky tried to sound tough while lowering her voice. Don't blame me. The company's problems are due to the economic situation. Caroline responded calmly. She had anticipated this reaction. Becky, I'm an accounting professional. If necessary, I can thoroughly investigate. I can examine transaction records, bank statements, everything. At these words, Becky's expression momentarily collapsed. She nervously fiddled with her hair and averted her eyes. Still, you can't access the company's internal records. I have contacts. And I could persuade Dad to request an investigation, Caroline said gently but firmly. Do you really want the truth to be revealed? This threat disturbed Becky. She repeatedly rotated the teaspoon placed on the table and sighed deeply. Fine. I'll talk to Dad. But... She hesitated for a moment before stating her condition. Pay for Mom's surgery before I talk. Otherwise, I can't tell Dad. Caroline stared intently at her sister's face. Becky's eyes were mixed with fear and shame. She could have exploited her sister's weakness, but she chose not to. All right, Caroline answered simply. But keep your promise. That evening, Caroline explained the situation to Robert. He sat on the office sofa, seriously listening to her story. Caroline, if there's anything I can do, tell me, Robert said sincerely. It's your family's problem, but I want to support you. Caroline was touched by his words. She never expected such support from someone she had met just a few months ago. Thank you, Robert, she said with gratitude. Just giving me in advance would be enough. Robert shook his head. Not in advance, I'll provide it as a bonus. Thanks to your work, the company's profits have increased significantly. This is a well-deserved compensation. With Robert's support, Caroline arranged her mother's surgery costs. On Sunday, she decided to visit her parents' home. The spacious mansion in Boston's suburbs was where Caroline had lived since childhood. Visiting after a long time, she felt strange emotions. Both harsh and warm memories coexisted here. She rang the doorbell and stood nervously. Walter opened the door. He had visibly aged and looked tired. Caroline? He said, surprised. May I come in? Caroline asked gently. In the living room, her mother was sitting in an armchair. She had lost weight due to illness and looked pale. Caroline sat beside her mother and took her hand. How are you, Mom? Martha smiled weakly. I never thought you'd come. Caroline took an envelope from her handbag and placed it on the table. This is for Mom's surgery. Why? Walter asked with a surprised expression. He looked inside the envelope and was astonished at the amount. Why would you do such a thing? Because we're family, Caroline answered simply. She didn't think further explanation was necessary. Martha said with tears in her eyes, I'm sorry for how we acted that night. When you lost your job, it felt like we were proven right, we were terrible. Caroline gently held Martha's hand. It's okay, Mom. Let's look forward now. After a moment's hesitation, she added, but Becky has something to talk about. Walter looked confused. Becky? Has she? At that moment, the sound of the front door opening was heard. Becky came in. When she noticed Caroline's gaze, she flinched for a moment but had come home as promised. Becky said quietly, I have something to tell you. All seated on the living room sofa, Becky began speaking in a trembling voice. She confessed to her father that she had diverted company funds for personal investments and suffered huge losses. Walter's face contorted with anger and the pain of betrayal. How could you? Walter shouted. I trusted you. Becky said through tears, I'm sorry. I always wanted to prove I was better than Caroline. Seeing her go her own way, I wanted to achieve a greater success too. It was an investment to get bigger returns, but I failed. Walter collapsed into a chair. His image as a strong father disappeared, now there was only a betrayed old man. The company, how much loss? About $2 million. Becky answered in a small voice. The room was enveloped in heavy silence. Martha covered her face with her hands, and Walter was stunned. Caroline stood up, approached her father, and placed her hand on his shoulder. Dad, let's think about how to rebuild the company. I can suggest some financial strategies. Walter looked up at her with surprised eyes. You? Why would you help us? After the way we treated you. Because you're my family, Caroline answered quietly. There was no blame or anger in her voice. That night, you hurt me, but now it's time to move past that. Martha wiped away tears and said, You've really become strong. Caroline smiled. Not so much stronger as knowing my own worth. And I've learned not to be trapped by past pain. She asked her father to explain the company's situation in detail and proposed examining the books. With Robert's advice, she began to develop a realistic reconstruction plan for her father's company. The company would have to downsize significantly, but complete bankruptcy might be avoided. Becky would take legal responsibility and leave the company. She accepted the consequences of her actions, though tearfully. Walter reluctantly listened to Caroline's advice and was impressed by the depth of her financial knowledge. For the first time, he recognized the wisdom and strength his daughter had gained by following her own path. Caroline, you've become a remarkable person. I was wrong, Walter apologized sincerely. Tears, which were rare, shone in his eyes. Caroline smiled. Let's look ahead now, Dad. The past is past. As she was leaving, Caroline was alone with Becky at the entrance. Her sister was looking at the floor, embarrassed. Thank you, Caroline. I've always been jealous of you, Becky said honestly. Caroline gently embraced her sister's shoulders. It's okay, Becky. Everyone makes mistakes. Let's start walking as sisters again from this opportunity. Becky nodded through tears. Caroline bid her farewell and got into her car. As she left her parents' home, she felt a strange peace within her heart. A year later, Boston was wrapped in the spring air. Martha had successfully completed her surgery and regained her health through rehabilitation. She was more energetic than before and had returned to local volunteer activities. Walter's company had downsized but avoided bankruptcy thanks to Caroline and Robert's advice. Walter was beginning to consider retirement and had softened his long-standing stern attitude. He regularly had lunch with Caroline and eagerly listened to her business stories. Caroline and Robert worked together to gradually grow elite dining. Their business partnership was wonderful, complementing each other's strengths. As they entered their second year, they successfully opened a third restaurant in an emerging district of Boston. Named Nova, this new restaurant quickly gained a reputation for its fusion of modern concepts and traditional flavors. Caroline became a business partner, and her financial management skills greatly contributed to the business's stability and expansion. Her name gradually became known in Boston's business circles, and she was sometimes featured in local economic magazines as a young executive to watch. Her relationship with Robert naturally evolved beyond work. Long meetings led to dinners, which eventually turned into dates. As their relationship deepened, they found understanding and companionship in each other. And 3 months after Nova's opening, Robert proposed to Caroline, and she accepted. Caroline's parents were also invited to their engagement party. Meanwhile, Becky, taking responsibility for embezzling company funds, was sentenced to 6 months of community service by the court. She reflected on her actions and apologized at the public hearing. After completing her sentence, she struggled to rebuild her career. Every time her past problems were brought up in job interviews, she felt like giving up. One day, Caroline contacted Becky. Would you like to have coffee together? Caroline suggested over the phone. Becky was surprised. Really? After what I did? Everyone makes mistakes. What's important is how you recover from them, Caroline said. How about Sunday at Nova? That day, Becky and Caroline met at a quiet terrace seat in the restaurant and talked as true sisters for the first time in a long while. Becky acknowledged her jealousy and desires and sincerely apologized to Caroline. I was always jealous of you, Becky spoke honestly. You went your own way, and I was always in Dad's shadow. I couldn't find my own worth. Caroline showed understanding. We're different people. That's fine. Everyone has their own journey. She proposed a job for Becky in the marketing department of Elite Dining. You can use your talents in a different way. Your communication skills are perfect for marketing. Becky cried. Giving me such an opportunity, thank you so much. A year and a half after the Thanksgiving dinner, Caroline and Robert held an opening party for their new restaurant. It was named The Last Supper, a concept celebrating accepting the past and new beginnings. The entire family attended the party, showing they had overcome their previous conflicts. Martha leaned close to Caroline and said, I'm truly grateful that you forgave us. Caroline smiled. The past is the past. Now is the time to look to the future. She raised her champagne glass high for a toast. To new beginnings. The entire family followed her. To new beginnings.